right, welcome back to another episode. It is good to be here in the Idea Collision. It is only by accident that these are happening every other week. This week, my office was not usable, so I wasn't able to use this, which is my studio. And so anyway, so we are going to be, I don't know, maybe this will turn into an every other week thing since just that's the way it seems to be going. But we're continuing the discussion here of resetting of kind of the societal things that we look around us and see various resets. We talk about prosperity and various things like that. But always, even when we are looking at cultural observations, we are wanting to leave with a spiritual application. And I think when we talk about resetting things and we talked about the turbulence that involves necessarily, we are always concerned about the direction of society, and we fret. And things look hopeless when we look around us and we see how awful things are or whatever. And I imagine that probably every generation thinks that their generation was the worst. It can't get any worse than this. And they look at the things. I think we all idealize a moment in time when we grew up and think that this was the best. Of course, the adults at that time were probably like, oh, no, you should have seen how awful it was, or how awful it is, is how they would have described it. There's a reference in the scriptures. It's in Galatians. It's chapter 1, verse 4. Paul describes society, and he talks about Christ coming to save people from the present evil age. And that's just a phrase that we read and we skip over, but that's an important statement. The present evil age, right? Like every age has been evil. It's just that Paul was living in his present evil age, and after him came a different one. And the application, of course, is that Christ came to save people from every evil age, not just that one, but that was the one that they were in, and so that was what Christ was saving them from. Everybody has grown up and lived in an evil age, so there's always a present evil age. They just kind of look a little different. The technology is different and stuff like that. So they look a little different, but there's a lot of similar things in each of them. Because as powerful as Satan is, and he is, we don't want to take him lightly. He's not very creative, right? He's not a creator. He changes what things are. God is a creator. So what God makes is very creative. But Satan just manipulates what already is there. So he's not very creative. So sin tends to look similar. It just has a different technology. And so the world cycles through these common errors, these common things, and it gets out of shape, and then it has to reset. It resets to something, and then there's another decline, and it looks different. The decline looks different, and this is how we cycle in terms of the world and cultures. Well, obviously, if Paul was saying, well, here's a really evil age. Well, let's say it was really bad, and would we say that we're worse than then? I don't know. Probably not. Probably about the same. But if we're not the same, and if things are constantly declining, we should be, 2,000 years later, we should be well beyond what they were. So it's obvious then that things have to reset from time to time and kind of bump up, and then that's where the decline happens. And so things have to reset, morally speaking. We talked about, financially, how things kind of reset. And there's a lot of applications there. But this is spiritual. This is moral. But that process is never gentle. Just like it's not gentle with weather, it's not gentle with anything. We refer to it as revolution. So every revolution is I should say it this way, not every revolution is on the basis of something good. Some have something very bad in them, even when they are producing something positive in the long term. The things that we look at are as negative. They might be bad in and of themselves, and yet still have a positive result down the line. I'll give you an example. The French Revolution is probably the premier example. I know we talk a lot about the American Revolution, but the American Revolution and the French Revolution, though they happen within years of each other, are very different, and they have very different results because of the premise of them. And so the French Revolution is more a microcosm of what I'm kind of talking about, where leading up to the French Revolution, you have two major types of abuses in society that lead to it. One was the abuses that come from what we would call the aristocracy or the monarchy, the elites, the political and financial elites of the society. That was one of the major abuses. The other abuses were coming from the religious sphere. And so they were kind of elites also, but they weren't isolated. They were actually connected. And this goes back a couple hundred years to a guy by the name of Charlemagne, who was really before France was France. They were called the Franks. He became what was referred to as the Holy Roman Emperor, and this started this idea of intertwining politics and religion. When we talk about separation of church and state, they were one and the same, and so the abuses of one really were the abuses of the other. They were connected even after the Holy Roman Empire really migrated over to Germany, which became the stronger nation in Europe. Those tendencies were still there, left in France, and so the religious elites and the political elites were taking advantage of the poverty and really not caring about the country, they were just sponging off everybody and using up all the resources for themselves. This obviously creates this top-heavy thing, and it's going to settle out just like a tornado. And so when revolution happened, it involved a lot of things, and we look at this as we say this is negative. There was atheism as a part of this revolution. That's bad, and it is. But there's a reason for it. It had to happen that way because the abuses, people were going to rebel against where they saw the abuses coming from. They weren't going to distill out one from the other, and so necessarily those religious elites had to go. And I'm not saying they should have been murdered, but I'm saying this had to happen as a statement of fact, not as a statement of morality. This was going to happen, and so it did. Well, as we say, things cycle, and so it's not a good process. Eventually, Robespierre was executed on his own guillotine. And all these murders that he started, right? The suspicion came to him, and it ends when Napoleon comes to power, and the French Revolution, or that aspect of the French Revolution, ends very quickly. All of that was necessary, even if it wasn't good, even if it was on the basis of atheism, even, and trying to get rid of religion, which didn't last that long, by the way. And so Napoleon restores order. He's short-lived for, a decade or a little bit less than a decade, and then he's done with power in the early 1800s, and there's like a mini revolution against him. So there's like these periods of transition, and the world isn't empty of evil, but it is a different place after the 1800s, and it is a better place after the 1800s. There's still evil, there's still atheism, there's still a lot of things, But there is a religious revival that occurs both in Europe and in the United States in the 1800s. It goes well into the 1900s. There was a resetting, and it comes out of this awful process, this storm in France. So it's not to say that everything was fine. There's still an evil age, but things were reset. I lived for several years in Ukraine. I've talked about that before. And obviously that makes me grieved about the things that are going on right now. But I can see the same process similarly, not to the grand scale, but spiritual things are resetting. And I experienced the corruption of Ukraine. People talk about that. I've experienced it on a personal level, on multiple personal levels. I remember trying to get a church property and the corruption that it required to even get that process moving. I have been extorted hundreds of dollars on the border by corrupt border guards. I've gone to the open market where we bought products, just simple small products, and had these ladies with their scales, and you could see that they had shaved the little grams and kilogram weights to make them lighter. It says kilogram, but it's not a kilogram. So you're paying a kilogram price for something that's less than a kilogram. Like all the way down, there's this society of corruption. And that comes from a couple of things. It comes from, one, being oppressed by religious elites and by political elites there. It comes from atheism. They feel justified in doing that. Why? Because they don't have a moral code. So there's all these things that go into their that go into their society that end up leading to corruption. And so now that's going on in Russia too. And so they don't have a moral code. And so all of this war really is a result of moral decay. And I can tell you that there's a reset as well. Now, I went to the Ukraine in 2004. The church there was 3 people. We worked with a very small congregation, and we were trying to get it off of the ground. When we started a transition to move back to the United States in 2014, after the first invasion, we said, we're going to probably have to leave here. We don't know what's going on. So in 2014, that had grown. We'd had people pass away. We had people move out, or whatever. The church was a net 20 people approximately. We began this transition to a local Ukrainian preacher, and by the time we left, it was already 35. In 1 year, it grew, as much as had grown in my first 10 years there. And so in the between 2015 when we left and a year and a half ago, that number had gone to about 50 to 60 people, and it was technically in 2 locations. When war broke out, about 2/3, like everywhere, 2/3 of our congregation fled. So that means, if you do the math, that we were back down to about 20 people between 2 locations. Well, I can tell you that today, in those 2 locations of our church, that is there, or 2 churches, whatever, there's almost 200 people. There's 100 and something in one location, and there's like 50 something in the other. It's almost 200 people. Well, that's in a year and a half. That's 1,000% growth. Right? That's incredible. When that hasn't happened anywhere, and I know that that's happening everywhere. I know that those stories are everywhere because I know people over there still. It's not isolated. Now, that doesn't make me happy that bombs are dropping, but it gives me perspective. I know that this war is not going to go on forever. I don't know what it's going to look like, in a year, 2, 3, whatever. I don't know what the borders are going to look like. I don't know what all the political stuff. I don't know any of that. I don't know what the economic situation is going to look like. Probably similar to what happens after every war. I don't know any of what is going to happen nationally in that sense. I don't know who's going to win. I don't know when. But I know what is going to happen. There's going to be a reset. There's already a reset. People are being very aware spiritually. And So there's there's something going on. People are aware of spiritual things because they're being forced to, and that is going to stay when this is over. There's going to be grief for a long time, 50, 70 years. This generation is going to be affected, but there's also going to be something that stays with them long term, long past when any of these dictators or whatever in Europe are gone, and presidents are gone. They're going to be left with things, meaningful things. It's a reset. It's a difficult process. It's a tornado. But there's, regardless of the political outcome, there's going to be something significant that they are left with. It's going to be beyond me. And I don't know what that will look like 100 years from now. Maybe in 100, 200 years, they're going through another reset. I don't know. That's just the way we work in humanity. In your own sphere, when things are turbulent, when things are very difficult, and it looks like things are just getting worse, I deal with this on a regular basis, both in terms of as a minister, you see people kind of run through cycles, and they seem to be doing the same, and there's another tornado in their life, and there's results typically of their own of making, but not always. Whether it is or whether it's just something that happens, the spiritual thing is to let that be a reset. Let that be something that allows you to look at your life, where you're at, where you're going, and make something positive out of it. That doesn't mean to like the process, because those are awful processes. Those are sad. We grieve. We have all sorts of negative things happening. There's trauma. It's not to say that we're supposed to like those things that make that happen. What I'm saying is to make it productive. To try to find a way to leverage that into a better life in the future. And so that as you go through your grief, and as grief becomes a part of your life for whatever reason, and you might not be in that, you might be in an up time now, there's going to be a reset. There's going to be something, the de-evolution process, because we all go through it, then there will be a reset. And so the reset is what gives meaning to that down period, even though the down period is awful and traumatic. Find a way to make that productive. If you're in that cycle now, spiritual things are a way to make that productive, so that as you go through the grief does not have to be alone. You can't get rid of the grief, but you can make sure that the grief is not alone. And I don't want to leave you with that. If these things help you in any way, if these things find you, make you think, or give you some direction, subscribe to the podcast, or even better, put someone that needs it in contact with this information. You can do that by sharing. We have links. If you are going through processes of down in your life, then look at some of the links that we have. There's other information that we have available through our website, through other podcasts that I have. But even more important than that are the connections that you can make through, if you are local to where I'm at, find, and even if you're not, I can help you find a church. And if you are grieving specifically, one of the ministries that I do is working with a grief ministry. They have, even if you're not local, they actually do it Zoom casts of some of these grief ministry, grief support groups that are so beneficial. And I see people coming away from those with kind of some fresh perspective on life, and looking that life is coming to something stable, that something is coming out of their storm. And I see that on a weekly basis. So look at some of those materials, and I hope to see you next week in the podcast.